My number one receiver this year is Jordan Addison, the USC, formerly Pitt wide receiver, who I think is falling out of favor now. Like earlier in the process, I think he was a lot of people's number one, and now between weighing in pretty lightweight, between not having tremendously good workout numbers, seems like he's slipping. You're seeing a lot of people now either with Quentin Johnston from TCU or Jaxon Smith-Njigba as the number one. Addison's kind of slipping by the wayside, but I think he's still, to me, the best composite of everything you want. He can play inside or out. At Pitt, he played very much in the slot primarily. At USC, he was primarily on the outside. Both years, he had extremely good production and a yards per route run point of view. He wins at all levels. He can go short, intermediate, deep. He's had a fairly complete route tree throughout his career. I just think he's the safest composite of everything you want. He reminds me a little bit of Garrett Wilson from a year ago, where you're sort of saying, is he great at anything? No, but he's good at everything.
Yeah, I mean, again, Wilson, I think we already mentioned, I think Wilson was a better prospect, route runner, and all that stuff. The Addison question marks are probably the workouts, right? 5'11", 173. So he's very slight, and this is the year of the slight wide receiver. I mean, over and over. A lot. I've talked to some people around the league who might be in the market for bigger receivers, right? Someone who's at least over 200 pounds, like your friend Bryce Young, who's over 200 pounds. And you can't find them, right? All the guys we're ranking are in the 170s, 180s as far as weight, some in the 160s. So 5'11", 173, and 4'9", 40, right? So you're talking basically a 4'5" guy in Jordan Addison at that type of weight. And, 3-cone was about average to below average. Everything's mediocre from a workout standpoint. So you're banking on Jordan Addison, the football player, Biletnikoff Award winner in 2021 at Pitt, and you're banking on him as the football player. But to your point, he is a good receiver, right? He's a good football player despite not being an incredible athlete.
It's also, I think it's an important thing to point out that as much as his workout numbers and size and like the complete composite, right, that relative athletic score that Kent Lee Platt puts together, MathBomb on Twitter, it basically ranks him average as a wide receiver, right? So it's an important distinction, I think, and that folds in size, movement skills, athleticism, all this kind of stuff. It's important, I think, to draw the distinction between bad workout numbers and just not great workout numbers. Like, his numbers were not problematic. They were simply not what you would want to see for a guy you're about to spend a first-round draft pick on, right? So I think it is pretty important to make that distinction that he didn't work out terribly. He just didn't work out really well.
So I have Addison as my number 2.
Okay.
And my number 1, I believe, is your number 2?
Yeah.
Who's your number 2?
Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Okay, so he's my number 1 wide receiver. Let's talk about both of these guys here. So Jaxon Smith-Njigba, what puts Addison above Smith-Njigba for you?
So Smith-Njigba, I think, can actually do more in the NFL than he did in college, by which I mean I think there's a reasonable chance that he can actually survive on the outside, play X receiver, beat press coverage, be more of a do-it-all type of receiver. Do what Addison has done in college, or do what Garrett Wilson did last year in the NFL. I don't think he should be pegged as just this slot guy, which is where a lot of people are going to label him coming in. But the difference between the two is one is a projection. The other one, I've seen it happen already. Like, I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba can do things in the NFL that he hasn't necessarily been asked to do in college. I already know Addison can do it because I watched him do it.
Yeah, I mentioned all of the measurables for Addison. In my notes, you could see him running away from corners on post routes down the field. Like, Addison feels fast. Smith-Njigba, on the other hand, doesn't feel fast, right? As I think I mentioned on the last show that I was here, I said, hey, in my notes, I said Smith-Njigba feels 4.55, and he ran 4.53. He doesn't feel fast. And I know that sounds ridiculous on the surface, right? One guy ran 4.49, one guy ran 4.53, but I'm just talking on the field game speed. Addison does feel faster than Smith-Njigba.
Do we know that if the tracking data separates them? Because their 40s are very similar.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I was trying to. Things are imploding over here. I didn't mean to look it up. I'm not supposed to give away too much tracking data. It's right. It's exclusive to our PFF IQ customers here.
One little data point. That's all I'm asking for.
I know. We could look for it. But yeah, I think Addison feels a little bit faster, but I still have Smith-Njigba as the guy. I mean, from a route running perspective, even though he was running out of the slot, I agree with you. I think he can play outside. I think he is so smooth. I've seen other people make the Amon-Ra St. Brown comparison. And, I've seen the question posed as well. Does that mean as a prospect? I think the comparison is, here's what you think he's going to look like in the NFL. And if you get an Amon-Ra St. Brown who can win outside, win in the slot, uber possession type, going to move the chains, I think Smith-Njigba can do all of that. So I like him as the one. I've got slightly more concerns about Addison being as effective in a high volume attack as Smith-Njigba, I guess, but it's close. It's all close. I think they're the two best all-around receivers, though, in the draft.
Smith-Njigba's selling point is route running and separation. Ironically, for a guy that runs 4.5, but it's the change of direction numbers. We had it on the screen a little bit, but he had an all-world 3-cone time, an all-world short shuttle time. Like the change of direction numbers he posted were absurd, like 99th percentile type of stuff, which is exactly what you need if you're going to offset being essentially a 4.5 guy. You add that to what I was talking to Renner about yesterday, this ability to over-exaggerate all the fakes that you run during your route. He's also really good at varying the pace of his routes. He runs routes in a very strange way. He's not like Stevie Johnson, who was like
Nobody knows that reference right now.
Right, old Buffalo Bills wide receiver, the guy that gave Darrelle Revis the biggest problems throughout his entire career. And the reason he did is because he ran routes in essentially such an ad-libbed, unpredictable way that Revis couldn't read him, right? You can read most receivers because you know how they run a route to get to a certain spot. Stevie Johnson would just kind of make it up on the fly and vaguely get to a point at the end of this thing. But it was so sort of ad hoc and chaotic that it was very difficult for a quarterback to like predict where he was going to be, which isn't necessarily the most helpful thing in the world. Smith-Njigba doesn't do it like that, but he varies his speed during the route. He varies the sort of the cadence of his gait. Does that make sense? Like his steps, the pacing of his steps varies. The movement patterns that he makes during the route are very difficult to read for defenses. And then you add that to the fact that once he decides to change direction, he can do it a hell of a lot quicker than you can with his 3-cone. Route running is his forte, and separation underneath and in the sort of horizontal stuff in particular.
I think Smith-Njigba has a great feel for playing in the slot. I think he's just got a good feel for just navigating the field. Sometimes you just see guys who know how to run routes against zone, how to find the soft spot. We hear that all the time. But also how to create separation against man, how to move defenders. I think Smith-Njigba's got a little wiggle before and after the catch. So he's my one. I get Addison as my 2. I did find the game speed numbers here. So over the last 3 years, our perception, which is Addison feels faster on the field, is correct.
Let's go.
By about a mile an hour, using the average max speed that they've hit, their average top 5, right? So we're looking at high-end plays here. Addison also hit over 20 miles an hour far more often than Smith-Njigba did. A lot of this is opportunity-driven, but it's just kind of giving you a gauge. Addison does play a little bit faster on the field, or at least he has to this point. So that is one of those data points that, right now I'd say 2/3 of the league have access to this data.
Love it when the data backs up what you think.
Yeah,
love it
when it feels right, and you can back it up that way. So despite as much as I love speed, baby, despite that, I'm still going Smith-Njigba 1 and Jordan Addison 2.
The other reasonable. Like I felt fairly strongly about Garrett Wilson being the number 1 guy last year. I don't feel as strongly about Addison this year, and people that want to make a compelling case for Smith-Njigba in particular, I'm open to that. The other notable point I think that's worth making for Addison is when you watched Kenny Pickett tape last year, Addison always jumped off the screen. And I've come to believe that this is one of my things, like the Senior Bowl, dominating at the Senior Bowl is I think an important data point. When you jump out based off somebody else's tape, I think that's a good data point. Like if you are obviously the best player when you're trying to watch somebody else, this is like Jalen Carter. No matter who you are watching on the Georgia defense, Jalen Carter was the guy that kept catching your eye. in the greatest defense in college football history. I think that's important. So for Addison to be consistently jumping out of Kenny Pickett's tape, even when he's not targeting Jordan Addison, I think is quite an important data point. Like it being that recognizable when you're not actually looking for a guy, I think is a notable thing.
All right, here's one other. I'll give you a model data point right here. Again, I'm A/B testing. I'm doing a couple here, but in this particular version of it, Smith-Njigba is in the top 15. I don't care about actual rankings necessarily within the model. It's just kind of like the clusters, right? There's the top 15 in the model. Smith-Njigba is in the top 5, but of the top 15 in this ranking, there's 6 elite players in that top 15. So the hit rate for just finding elite players using the model is pretty good. We're talking Devontae Smith, who has been an elite production guy. Jalen Waddle is up there, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and then Drake London. All of those guys using our WAR metric have been elite relative to the rest of the league. Other players up in this ranking are guys like Amari Cooper, Marquise Brown, Corey Davis. Before I even loved Corey Davis from a data standpoint, the data did love him. So it's not perfect, obviously. There's also guys like Tywan Taylor in there who never did anything. Jerry Jeudy's up there too, who I think is only listed as an average player so far because that's what he's done for 2 years, part of injuries. But he could be better. So like to me, Smith-Njigba's in good territory just from a data production combine standpoint. Jordan Addison is still solid, but not necessarily at that level. So I'm letting the data maybe dictate my ranking here as well.